To kick things off. Here I go. I've written it out. Usually I speak contemporaneously, but for this, for a number of reasons, I'm actually just going to read from a script here. I expect that we're going to hear a great deal from friends and coworkers about my mother's contributions in peace and women's studies.
Speak up just a little more.
Not really the best to speak to her career for my contributions, but for my contribution to this celebration of her life, I'll speak more about stories about how she's a mother and how she influenced me. These stories are going to be introspective, but I think I'm choosing ones in which you will hear, I'm guessing, parallels to your own experiences. And hopefully the view of this different facet of her life and the parallels will enrich all of your memories and help you all better cherish and celebrate her life, which is the point of this. One way or the other, it's been good for me to put these memories and meanings of the memories together into my own words to celebrate her life. And so I hope you'll also get something from it. Over the last couple of months, I've been thinking a lot about what I might say today. It's frankly been difficult, maybe not so much for obvious reasons. I think perhaps one of the greatest mental blocks for me is that it still really hasn't sunk in that she's gone, to be quite honest. Most every year since my life took me away from where I grew up in Illinois, tried to come home during the holidays, and I suppose it'll really sink in this coming holiday that she isn't there and we aren't buying tickets to go for that purpose at least. And in a way I'll realize that I won't be coming home anymore. So this observation, as I mentioned, many observations to come, it's introspective and perhaps doesn't reach the audience here very much at home. But on the other hand, one of the reasons why I chose to bring this out is it might be another way to see her, to offer this perspective of a constant in my life, a home that one always returns to. And for family, I think of it as, now from the perspective of a father, a wonderful remembrance of a constant in someone's life, someone looking forward to coming home. And that was my mother to me. This reminds me of a similar impulse that I saw in my mother. She would return to family as well. When I was young, it seemed like every holiday for many years, we would return to Long Island, where my grandmother and much of my mother's family lived at the time. I remember many road trips from Urbana to Long Island, and these trips actually formed some very strong memories. One set of cherished memories of the trips to Long Island was the dynamic, vigorous New York holiday dinners of the family. It was a marvelous and engaged back and forth between aunts and uncles, including, as you might expect, my mother. They would be explaining things some point, and explaining is a Midwestern way of saying arguing. And they'd be doing it quite passionately. And later in life, I learned that the degree of detailed, passionate explaining that I thought was normal might be considered in some other families to be effectively, I quote, World War III. This was actually a quote from an in-law. This description really made me laugh at the first time that I'd heard it. I laughed and in some sense baffled by it. But one of the simple reasons was it's just funny to hear my mother portrayed as one of the chief warmongers. But the World War III comment was also funny because it was surprising to me how it seemed to miss the point, at least how I took these things, in that to me it seemed that the family was participating in these explanations of their ideas and opinions for the purpose of getting to the truth of the matter, and all the time often doing it in witty ways, which was quite enjoyable. And my mother was very dynamic in these discussions, and I think this is one of the contexts of this type of dynamic person and discussion that I'll always remember, and I suspect all of you have seen elements of that in your own experiences with her. I still find the memories of the family dinner discussions with my mother wonderful, and I marvel at how the family could really go after all these details with such vigor and logic and cutting wit. And my Aunt Robbie, the writer, was a dubious prospect to try and outdo in any kind of game of words, but that didn't stop my mother. And the debates amusingly stopped at no small detail. A good example, bagel cutting. You might be surprised at how passionate someone can be about the best way to cut a bagel. And this is not a small thing in the family. And there are pros and cons of cutting bagels on its side versus flat. And let's not forget what kind of knife and what kind of cutting board. This is very serious business. This particular discussion ended in a stalemate sequence of my aunt berating my mother, her younger sister, my mother being, "You'll cut your finger off." And my mother retorting, "If you were right, I think I would have cut my finger off after these last 60 years. As someone who really appreciates trying to get at the minute truth of the matter, including bagel cutting, that was really funny for me. And also how the argument concluded. In a humorous way, they walked away without any problem. It's reflective times like this also that makes me appreciate how growing up with my mother instilled similar instincts to find the right of the matter or the truth of the matter through discussing things, testing the norm, and that it was necessary to question authority. She was not afraid to let us argue with her about something we believed in. Perhaps it did rub off a little, as I've been described as a passionate debater at work and in my career, and I believe it served me well. It's also gotten me into trouble occasionally with authority. But I'm still grateful for what I believe is something of a rich inheritance from my mother in this way. Speaking of qualities learned from living with my mother, independence is another one that jumps to mind. An unforgettable anecdote for me about the double-edged quality of the independence she taught us is another memory of one of these holiday trips to New York, some that many of you actually know. I was maybe 6 years old, I don't know exactly how old. And there are these combined restaurant, gas station, gift stores, and restroom stops all down the Pennsylvania Turnpike that we were driving between Urbana and Long Island. And my mother stopped at one and asked me whether I needed to go to the restroom as she was stopping to go for herself. And in my typical 6-year-old spirit, I immediately said no to any suggestion any parent would say to me because I was busy doing my own thing. I'm sure I was focused on a fun moment. But then, having time to think about it while she was gone already, it occurred to me maybe that would be a good thing to do. And so I did go. I was independent. I didn't think about it, and that's how she taught us to be. Well, unfortunately, my mother didn't notice that I had chosen to take that liberty of independence, and she left without me. It took me a little while to figure out what happened, but when I realized I had been left behind with no breadcrumbs to follow, I was naturally feeling lost and in tears, and I wandered into a gift shop, which turned out to be good instincts, or maybe just a natural magnet for a young boy at that age. But anyway, some police were called. There really was a chase with sirens. It all worked out in the end, including the little boy getting a very nice stuffed tiger from a super nice gift shop owner. There might have also been, perhaps ever so slightly, a disappointed big brother. What an opportunity lost to finally be rid of the little monster. Regardless, he got a very good laugh out of it and has never let me forget it. And I'm sure he would have missed the little monster after a little while. Anyway, as a parent, I appreciate more and more that teaching and adhering to giving your children independence is a scary business. And I'm grateful for her confidence in me and my brother, that she felt that she could give us the space to be as independent as we were over the years. Independence, in my mother's case, also includes having been a model for me with respect to intrepid pursuits. It made an impression on me that she took what appears to at least me very adventurous risks in general, including joining a kibbutz, I think as a teenager, near the beginning of Israel's founding, and subsequently spending time in Germany as part of a Fulbright not so long after the war. As a Jewish woman studying the Nazi war machine for her PhD, she was more than aware of the profoundly sinister behavior towards Jews that had manifested itself in that country. And yet she went there relatively soon after the war and furthermore saw beyond these stereotypes to make long-lasting friendships with Germans who later turned out to take care of me when I stayed in Germany. This choice to go to Germany was also where she met my father, and so my brother and I are happy outcomes of this adventurous spirit. Today, also, as I'm remembering her for her example, I think she helped me sometimes choose a more intrepid path, including following her footsteps with a Fulbright year in Germany myself. Sometimes I personally need to overcome an overly cautious root instinct not to take any risks. As some of you know me, think of me more like a chess player, and instead focus on taking good risks. And that's something that I have also learned from her. I'd like to think of her now as an example to remember to continue taking good risks, and including other examples in my past that seemed scary at first. Things like traveling to Africa and literally traveling to Timbuktu to visit my future wife, who at the time was in Guinea for Peace Corps. It was a very happy choice, and I'm glad I took that risk. Anyway, I'm grateful for my mother's example, how has it helped me in the past sometimes see how to simply not be afraid, particularly of these good risks, and surely not to be afraid to engage with more alien environments and ideas. And furthermore, to her credit and beyond what I have had to face, she is an example to me of standing firm to her ideals, so much so that fear did not dictate her choices with respect to the protests that she felt necessary to pursue, including some notable times like the ones including police, state capitals, and chains. And so anyway, I remember my mother today for this gift of wisdom. Be intrepid. Don't let fear overrule taking necessary risks, and certainly not good risks. It would be an absurdly sized void in my telling here if I didn't mention how hard she worked and the impression it made on me. I still have memories of falling asleep to her typing endlessly on those old electric typewriters. I feel like I can still hear the tapping of those keys and the sense of falling asleep to what became a comforting reminder of her presence and efforts. She seemed to always be working, but I always remember that, for example, if I needed a ride, to school that is, because I missed the bus, she was there for me. She figured it out somehow, and seemingly tirelessly. Except, I think at least one time it did catch up with her. Because I also have a vivid memory of seeing an ambulance at our house and my mother being wheeled out on a gurney. I don't remember what it was, but my recollection was that it was exhaustion, which would make sense considering all the balls she was juggling. She got better. It didn't happen again. And sometimes you don't really understand or appreciate these things until you are a parent again, yourself, and you realize how much she's figured out, and that she figured out how to manage all this workload. She also was able to spend enough time to impart some key general wisdom to her children and when she could, to her grandchildren. She certainly instilled a poignant awareness of progressive issues of justice, equality, and general fairness, sometimes in a startling fashion for myself as I was growing up. I recall one time when she starkly broke down my simplistic, isolated Middle Illinois perspective as a boy and detailed some specific aspect of current events and context. And I remember her highlighting how important it was to recognize that I was very lucky to be a white male. On the other hand, I can't help but also think about the dissonant image and her undoubted chagrin of having raised two sons that seemed quite dedicated to playing with toy soldiers and other war games, despite her dedication to peace. Yes, this is how we, the sons, spent our allowance that she gave us for our chores. She did have a second chance with her granddaughters and seemed to derive great joy in encouraging their pursuits like ballet and theater. Anyway, reflecting back a moment here with respect to her efforts to impart her wisdom about life and how to live it, something must have sunk in, I believe, for me, and in the words of my wife, who herself works to help underprivileged children in New Mexico and is sensitive to the modern challenges of a working mother, "Your mother taught you well," I quote. One last memory comes to mind that is perhaps a way to say farewell for the moment. I'll never forget a gift she gave me after I completed my PhD from Princeton. She gave me a book and wrapping paper, and now have just completed a higher degree and thinking quite highly of myself, I'm sure. I was expecting something that might have been described as a sophisticated gift, some treatise on the philosophy of knowledge or I don't know what. But no, she gave me the book from Dr. Seuss, The Places You Will Go. Some lines from it. You have brains in your head. You have feet in your shoes. You can steer yourself any direction you choose. You're on your own, and you know what you know, and you are the guy who will decide where to go. She probably should have crossed that out and said gal. The combination of perhaps her sense of wisdom and humor led her to give me the timeless Dr. Seuss story with all the pithy advice that I think actually anyone really needs. Anyway, I'm not personally very observantly religious, and so I don't know much about drawing guidance from conventional religious sources of solace as to how best find closure or to say farewell. And instead, it occurs to me to be more natural for me to invoke the following goodbye, which is really not exactly to say goodbye at all. And perhaps I don't believe in no-win scenarios. Anyway, I'd like to think that she continues to be with us in our memories and how she has shaped us, and therefore as we grow, she grows through us. She is with us, a part of us as we move forward, and so again, shaped from her inspiration, I'll draw another line from Dr. Seuss, The Places You Will Go, to say this is not a goodbye to my mother, rather to say, and this is Dr. Seuss, today is your day, you're off to great places, you're off and away. Thank you for listening, and I really encourage everyone to come up and share and broaden our memories of her so that we can better cherish those memories and so that she can continue to grow with us. Thank you. It's my daughter Sophie. I think Max wants to speak.
Hi. My name's Sophie. Hi. Grandma Berenice was an awesome grandma. I really missed her. She was amazing. She told us stories. She smiled a lot. She was very generous. There are photos of her playing with me when I was really little, 3 at youngest, and I really missed her, and I'm really glad you all came, and I hope I learned more about her and how she was such a great person.
I don't think this is turned on.
No. Go ahead. Is it too tight?
Please.
Yeah, I guess I could change.
No, it's down here, Frank. There's a control box.
It says it's on.
Seems to be. Well, Katie, you found a knob, right? To amplify. Better be careful here.
I think it was.
Who's turned that on?
Hello. Hello.
Let's see. You have to talk really closely.
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem.
I think it'll work now. Yeah, good.
Can you try-
Hello, my name is Max, and I want to share some memories of my grandma. She was she was a great grandma, and I loved her like a shooting star. She was the best grandma I've ever seen. I love her like a shooting star too.
You ready?
I was recruited, hired at Purdue in 1992, 26 years ago, by Berenice. And I worked in women's studies for, 18 years or so. And feel like, in really crucial ways, Berenice was a mentor and an example. And some of my fondest memories have to do with going to big bashes at Berenice's house. Many of you probably remember there used to be a swimming pool at the Thornbush house, and there was a party one summer where everybody was just enjoying swimming and playing. And casual food and lots of conversations and just an extremely welcoming air, which is, I think, what she accomplished in women's studies more generally. It was a very open and democratic venture where people from all across the campus who were interested in feminist work were welcome. And those are lessons that have meant a lot to me, that have helped shape me into the person I am and the academic I am. And I think has been crucial to a lot of us. Berenice could be fierce. She could be hard on people. She could be hard on herself. One of the things I really admired, though, is that she could also say, I was wrong. I'm sorry. And those are qualities that live with me, too. I certainly have the streak of being a little fierce myself. So I remember her with very mixed feelings, but so much fondness. And I'm glad that we're all here to celebrate her life.
I think I might know Berenice as long as any of the academics here. I met her in 1968. She wanted to organize women in the historical profession. I was a graduate student then at the University of Chicago. She was at the University of Illinois. She sent a letter to Chicago to Joan Scott. Most of you do feminist stuff, know who she is, but she didn't have any desire to help organize women. So she passed it on to this graduate student. And so I took it over, and Berenice, of course, treated me just exactly as she would have treated Joan or anyone else. And we organized the Coordinating Committee on Women in the Historical Profession. We went to Washington at the American Historical Association, and were on television with a local news commentary show about this new great organization and everything we were going to do for women. And all of that, and then I've been to AHA meetings and stood on chairs and done all kind of organizing. But I don't want to talk about that because I think there are plenty here who can talk about Berenice and the university and general organizing. I want to talk about her as an intellectual. She wrote some of the most important works that we're ever going to read about women and about people generally. And too many people don't know. The two most important things she wrote, one was on the class system of the intellect. If you haven't read it, it's brilliant. And another is on the power of the powerless. She was really marvelous in understanding the interaction between intellectual work and power. And she made the points clearly there, but she made them in her life. Her life really combined those two topics. And I guess the only thing I might bring in that might have been sort of to fit back in with what Malcolm was saying about difference. I used to think that Berenice became too overwhelmed with an interest in peace and gave up thinking enough about women. So there was some conflict between Clint and me as to whether Berenice should focus more on women or more on peace. But obviously she was able to do both. And my remembrance of her is how she tried to reach out to all of us and bring us all closer, while at the same time, as was mentioned, standing up for what she believed and being one of the strongest persons that I've met in my lifetime.
Is this right? Okay. So much to say about Berenice. I had to choose between a book or a short something to say. There's history, I chose the shorter. History, political science, and also I can get through it, I hope. Women's studies, peace studies, academic writing, teaching, activism, mentoring, and I could go on. Some has been said already, and more will be said, I'm sure, after I finish. I just want to talk briefly about how she made me feel included in her circle of family. It was especially important to me since I had no family in West Lafayette, except, of course, Harry and my daughter, Rebecca. I remember holiday occasions, birthday celebrations, occasions when David and his family came, occasions when Malcolm and his family, or sometimes both, were visiting. And most recently, also, when her sister and brother-in-law, Robbie and Charlie, may they rest in peace, moved to Lafayette. Berenice often included Harry and me in a group of 6, of course, including Clint, who went out to supper together. Afterward, we often went to Robbie and Charlie's house for talk and laughter and as I mentioned recently to David, an overwhelming array of desserts. We have a number of friends here whom we consider fictive kin, which is what we talk about in family studies, and I know in anthropology and other academic areas, or just like family. And Berenice was an important member of that group. She's already missed by me and so many people here and elsewhere in so many different ways. I see somebody back there who's nodding her head, whom I know. One of the ways I miss her is as a family member and friend.
Good afternoon. I'm Celine Phillips. I first met her when Dr. Phoebe Ferris introduced me to her in the mid-'80s, so I wrote this little like a poem about her and Clint. Neighbor, friend, colleague, confidant, how lucky was I? Neighbor, when Bernice and Clint lived on Redwood and Lafayette and Mike and I lived on Cypress. Friend, at celebrations and over rough roads. Colleague, when I needed support as I toiled in Purdue's affirmative action office. Confident, when these ivory towers were too much for one Ojibwe woman to take. We could count on their help, working on inclusiveness, battling civil rights, conquering environmental problems, and laughter, lots of laughter, good food, sharing. They placed a chink in the armor of the cannon, these very walls, this ivory tower. These very walls where I keep peering around looking for her and for Clint's supportive presence. There is an emptiness, a hollowness to our chit-chat, a loneliness to our gathering, a space, a something that won't be replaced, that cannot be filled. The need is not over, war not won, and if we honor their lives in love, we are called to go to those dark corners, carry a torch for seemingly impossible tasks, and love our neighbors and enemies until they give in to what may at times seem to be an unattainable, the peace we all long for. Miigwech.
Hello, everyone. Okay. I'm Jennifer Freeman Marshall. I'm an associate professor in English, and women's gender and sexuality studies. And I'm also the current director of women's gender and sexuality studies, just having started the position just 2 weeks in. A little overwhelmed, I might say, in a good way, overwhelmed by this moment, and also by the shoes that people have said to me, you have big shoes to fill. I will say that I won't try to, but that I will try to model the very best of what she offered us as an intellectual, as a colleague, as an activist, as an individual that I know was so very committed to the social justice movements that we must be committed to in order to make a difference in our world. When I first met Berenice, I had just started my position here in 2009, and my first impression of her was that she was gracious and kind. A person also who was very well respected by all of her colleagues. What I've heard thus far about her today from so many of you, of course, supports that. Throughout the years, we would run into each other at different events, and she would always inquire as to my well-being, and it was really genuine, offered her support. Yeah, just a really solid person, and I got the impression that she meant it, right? Very sincere person. The other way that I came to understand, or to understand truly the significance of her work, I think, is through the program that the Women's Studies that we sponsor, the Berenice Carroll Feminism, Peace, and Social Justice Award, which I've had the opportunity to serve on that committee with other colleagues in the process of awarding money awards in support of the very best student work that's representative of Bernice's commitment to peace and social justice. I really wanted to read a poem, and I went in search of something that I thought might sort of capture the many sort of small impressions that she made on me, and that would also maybe speak to what I understood her larger contribution to society, to our community. And so I'll just read that, and then I want to make one other quick statement. So the title of the poem is Making Peace, and it's by Denise Levertov. A voice from the dark called out, "The poets must give us imagination of peace to oust the intense, familiar imagination of disaster. Peace, not only the absence of war. But peace, like a poem, is not there ahead of itself, can't be imagined before it is made, can't be known except in the words of its making, grammar of justice, syntax of mutual aid. A feeling towards it, dimly sensing a rhythm, is all we have until we begin to utter its metaphors, learning them as we speak. A line of peace might appear if we restructured the sentence our lives are making, revoked its reaffirmation of profit and power, questioned our needs, allowed long pauses. A cadence of peace might balance its weight on that different fulcrum. Peace, a presence, an energy field more intense than war, might pulse then, stanza by stanza into the world, each act of living, one of its words, each word, a vibration of light, facets of the forming crystal. And I would say that Bernice is peace, a presence, an energy field more intense than war. Every time I met her, I had that sense of this very strong person. I'm a tall person. She's not so tall, she'd come up to me. And I could feel the power of her presence. And that will always stay with me. And so I want to make one final comment. So colleagues say, we remember that time when Bernice was, really active with the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies program, and the spirit of democracy, the spirit of a space where affiliates and core faculty could come together and debate vigorously and share their ideas. And when I gave my talk for the position, I talked about creating a space where we might be able to do that. And one of the things that that I've come to, and I've just had the opportunity to talk to core faculty about this, is that we would hold an annual feminist salon, that it would be someplace on campus where we could meet informally, have more of an opportunity to gather and to just talk about the issues that are important to us. My hope is that we will have this event in late October. I'm in the midst of trying to plan all of that as we speak. And that it will be my great honor to dedicate the Feminist Salon to Bernice's memory.
where the Kleenex are hidden. Hi, my name's Loretta Kensinger. I know a lot of you here, but I don't know everyone. I come from a very tearful family. I think that's a good thing. Berenice helped me see that it was okay to have emotions. I've prepared some words here today, but you've inspired me to also let you know that Berenice changed my life in so many ways, but particularly as an academic. I was a political science major, and with Penny Weiss, who I also can't thank enough, she showed me there was a way to be an academic and to be a human being who cared about the world, that dispassion wasn't a way to be an academic, that the world needed academics to care. And she gave me a home, and women's studies became my home, and I'm very proud of that. And so I wanted to start there. I'm going to read what I wrote. Mostly what I write is not about my experience with Berenice, but coming to terms with the idea that she is not here. I want to start, though, by thanking the family. I can't thank you enough for inviting us into this moment. It means a lot to me. I want to thank River and Patsy and Pat and Terry Knight for all your work to gather us together. It couldn't be more fitting. We have covered those men up before at other events in this room with Berenice, so it's nice, and I'm so honored to have done that with one of her grandchildren today, so thank you. To my dear friends who are in this room and all the friends of Berenice and Clint who are in this room, my sincere condolences at all our loss. We are lucky, we are really lucky to have had them in our lives, and so I'm glad to share these words with you. It was so hard to put pen to paper to capture all I want to say about Berenice. It came out in fits and starts, so I've winnowed it down to this. I titled it Songs for Berenice and for Clint as well. A song of mourning and renewal. A May morning, like any others, I sit in discussion with a Latina student who has awoken to feminism and wants to change her major to women's studies. As I turn to my computer to open her advising file, I see notes from Dina and Ellen, both reaching out to give me the news of your passing. I grow ashen, as though the air has been sucked out of the room. Time slows as I walk to a friend's office for comfort. Returning to that poor student left bewildered in my office, I am struck by the circle, how her newfound feminism is fed by the love of this field, you and that magic community that you both entered into and helped to nurture in women's studies at Purdue, awakened in me. I take heart at the way a part of your legacy lives on in my work. A song of community. I have searched through boxes of old photos, hunted through 2 computers for photos of you, for cards from you, searching for you. So few glimpses of you in my archives for one who in my life looms so large and present. I have spent my spring and summer connecting with River and trying to figure out how to tell so many others you have passed. Those I connect with, Nada Alea, Priya Kurian, Barbara Corbel, Lisa Schaefer, so many people from NWSA. Those I connect with reach back to me, your death providing a chance for us all to remember where we have come from, catch up on where we are, and honor how we are united in degrees of separation from you. Your loss, as one friend said, seems a passing of an era, one that seems in hindsight filled with more hope, more light than our current age. There is much we come to celebrate today, and much we come here to mourn. as you did at Penn and Protest, as you did throughout your life. Your death has reunited diverse communities. Our gathering across our differences in temperament and time, locations, disciplines, cultures attest to that power of community building always at your core. Hybrids of your seeds, planted in our individual soils, we each carry some part of your truth and life forward. A unique band of peaceniks I am happy to sing along with today. A song of gratitude. Alice Walker says, quote, "Thank you is the best prayer that anyone could say. Thank you expresses extreme gratitude, humility, understanding. Things the world and many of us here personally owe you thanks for are too many to count. The need to take peace seriously, the radical work of the ERA, the thriving anti-racist transformation of the National Women's Studies Association, building a space for women in history and political science, the letters of recommendations, the advice, the jobs, the battle scars, and the love. You were both living proof that academics did not have to be dispassionate or, to quote Howard Zinn, neutral on a moving train. Despite the many ways your coming into my life has helped me professionally, it is the more personal realities I most recall in your passing. Penny and you surprising me with my hood at my PhD graduate defense party, a hood used later that night for a dollar dance to help pay off my student loan. I made $15. Or riding on the riverboat in Seoul with you. You were not only my mentor, but became my dear friend, taking time to visit many of my homes. I need to express particularly publicly today how grateful I am that after I left Purdue, you gave me a place to catch my breath during the many trips I took back to Indiana to visit my mother when she was in decline. Still, I strive to not fall too much into the nostalgic. You deserve more than that. A breathing woman full of your own salt and vinegar, you were, as we all are, fully human. And besides, the gifts, the lessons you imparted are not a thing of the past. The struggle and your legacy lives on. A Song of Oaks. Sitting at the Kate Wolf Music Festival in the Northern California hills, organized on Wavy Gravy's land, at a tribute performed by the son of Utah Phillips, I write my first words trying to capture my feeling on your both passing. For those who don't know, Utah Phillips was an IWW member and an American folk icon. In his tribute, Utah's son talked about how his father referred to history as the long memory. Then he broke into a song telling a story of the successful 1912 women-led textile strike in Lawrence, Massachusetts, now often referred to as the Bread and Roses strike. In that field of hippie love and wobbly revolution, how could I not think of you both? So I end today with a version of the words that came to me on that day. Listening to Utah's son singing Bread and Roses under the Northern California oak brings you back via Clint, that piano playing fixture of every party you hosted. Was that the first place I heard this song story of women marching not only for bread, but also for the finer things of life, like songs at festivals under the summer sun? And two sisters, no more than 3 or 4, wear their feminist shirts, emphasis in pastel pink on the words central M-I-N-I, mini. I tell their mom and dad to send them my way when they hit college and learn that their mom and dad are also from Fresno. And the smallness of this planet hits me as it has all weekend, as it has since May. And Berenice and Clint and Utah's son remind me to respect the long memory, a lesson you taught me by example. as when I sat in a car with you, and was it really Charlene Mitchell, the African American COC, CCDS, feminist, and civil rights activist, and the first African American woman to run for president of the United States. In that car, in that back seat, both of you chatting as though you were both just humans. And you were both, Berenice, so fully human, and also so much more. You who chained yourself to state houses and could not figure out why we students who gathered around you at that kitchen table consumed that story of radical courage in such awe. Imbibing this vital part of your long story, you nourished us in love and revolution, teaching us to dance in revolution, to lead in revolution, always from the heart, not the gun, with women at the front, respected but not worshiped, recognizing this all takes organizing work, as does being human, yet it often also takes just showing up and singing our songs. So I show up here under this Indiana sky, surrounded by these oaks you have nurtured, and think of you and Clint and the gifts you gave me of home, of love, of peace, of revolution, of music, of a new way plucked from these terrible days. Your story has now become each of ours. We have been nourished. We must now share what we have been fed. Fierce courage, fierce feminism, fierce peace, and fierce love.
Hi, I'm Joyce Meyer, and I actually know Berenice from the days of rebellion. I was a political science student at the U of I, but that is not how I knew Berenice. I never had her as a professor, and so it wasn't until the days of rebellion that I got to know her. So I really did actually know her more personally than intellectually, I guess. But of course, she was very much an inspiration to me. I identified with her a lot because I was a young Jewish woman, and she had this history, including with Zionism, and she later turned away from that. I was just talking with my spouse about that this morning, and but I was still very interested in Jewish and Zionist causes, and I almost hesitate to bring it up because there are so many different opinions about that, but I know that I identified with her, and I used to have discussions with her about why she turned away from it, and my own view has kind of evolved over time and looking at those kinds of things, but that's what comes to me to talk about at this moment, and so I don't want to deny that part of the history that I and the struggle and the discussions and the arguments that she and I had over that, because that was something that I needed and I wanted to, kind of discuss with her. And I remember that that was a period when there was a lot of, there was just starting to be more, I guess, what they call identity politics now, because it was difficult to be Jewish, or just there was some additional kind of awareness of being Jewish or ethnic, I guess. I don't probably have some of the right words, but in terms of being in the women's movement and the lesbian movement, there was starting to be an awareness that there needed to be more room for being able to be a Jewish woman in lesbianism and feminism, and that there needed to be more room for there to be lesbians and feminists in Jewish environments and events and synagogues and things like that. So that's, she was an important part of my evolution at that time in relation to that. But also, I just want to say a little bit about how kind, and other people have mentioned her generosity and so forth. She was really just so kind and generous to me, and so was Clint. I mean, I was, a poor student. I was about, in 1982, I must have been like in my early 20s, and as I've mentioned, I identified with her a lot, but also I think she, I mean, I was like surprised to hear that she had died. I think I in some ways thought of her as kind of immortal. And then there was this other side where I think she was somewhat of some sort of parental figure a little bit to me, and a mother figure of sorts. And I was just reminiscing a little bit when I talked with David earlier, and I think I mentioned a couple others, that one of the strongest memories I have from the days of rebellion, in addition to the protests and the songs and the struggle and some of the frightening moments and so forth that we shared and that bonded all of us who were protesting with the Days of Rebellion in Springfield for the ERA, which, by the way, Illinois did just pass this year, so only 36 years later. But we're glad to have it. And we went there to chain in front of, I guess it's like, I don't even, I'd have to actually review something to remember for sure, but I think it's in front of the Senate. They have the railings there, and we, had this plan about how we were going to chain in together, and we did it. And of course, you couldn't get metal past the doors of that building now, but so somehow we did that, and I think we thought we were going to be arrested immediately, and they just kind of left us there. And so, I had kind of come, just dressed for the day, I think maybe a lot of the people in this room know that we ended up like spending the whole weekend there, like a good four days of a long weekend, and 3 or 4 days at least. And so the part that in particular David and I discussed that nobody else I think in this room will know until now is that, Clint had to come back because the women, Berenice stayed there, we all stayed there, and there were these folks that were support folks for us who went back and got additional clothing and so forth. And so my partner at the time and I were both there, so there was nobody to go home for us. And so when Clint went back and got some extra clothes for Berenice, when it came time where I couldn't stand the t-shirt I was wearing or whatever any longer, Berenice almost literally gave me the shirt off her back, because it was actually literally, and it's in the picture there that's of all of us in Life magazine, that the shirt that I'm wearing right in the center of that picture is actually Berenice's. So she not quite literally gave me the shirt off her back, but that was the kind of I mean, I was a poor student. They helped me she hired me to do some work, trying to organize her stuff, her papers and things in her basement for a while. They helped me get another job. I mean, it was, just really nice, decent stuff like that. So I ended up talking longer than I thought I would. So thank you, but, I'm just really appreciative of being here and being able to say something up here. Thank you.
Hello, I have to speak about peace studies. In 1972, Berenice Carroll published a prescient article in a special issue of the Journal of Conflict Resolution, edited by Elise Boulding and Clint Fink. The article was called Peace Research, The Cult of Power. In this seminal article, Berenice pointed out that virtually all theories of international relations, politics, and society began with a conception of power, a conception that seeped into the public consciousness and even affected insights of more radical emerging peace researchers. Power in this sort of dominant way meant domination, control, the capacity to force others to behave in ways that the powerful desired, And as long as the ability to control and dominate were unequally distributed, only those with the greatest power were worthy of attention. However, Berenice reminded us that there used to be definitions of power in public discourse that emphasize liberation rather than control. These alternative definitions of power included words like strength, competence, rigor, energy, empowerment, and the ability to actualize. To quote Berenice, thus it appears that the currently predominant understanding of power as control and dominance is a development of recent decades. She suggested that peace researchers and others fail to, quote, challenge the prevailing conception of power as dominance, its preoccupation with institutions, groups, and persons which are seen as powerful, that is, elites, key decision makers, the big nation states in international relations. She suggested that even progressive scholar activists have inadvertently embraced the cult of power and hence gave continued legitimacy to the status quo rather than take the side of social change. What implications for peace and feminist theory did Berenice suggest should be deduced from this cult of power? First, scholar activists needed to reject the notion that power represents dominance. Second, scholar activists needed to broaden their research lenses from focusing on so-called powerful institutions like the nation state or decision-making elites or the patriarchal system, and begin to examine the entirety of the social, political, and cultural terrain, particularly what we would call today intersectionality. Third, scholar activists needed to utilize the older conception of power as actualization, competence, assertion of rights. In other words, a vision of power that understands that change involves mobilized publics, not ordinarily studied or valued. Fourth, scholar activists needed to reject a frame on reality, accepted even by more radical analysis, that presents history as the struggle between the powerful and victims, and which portrays people as powerless, ignorant, or lacking in resources to assert themselves. Summing up, Berenice wrote, one of the most pernicious effects of the cultist conception of power is that it has built up a strong association between the lack of power in the sense of dominance and powerlessness in the sense of helplessness. To break out of this mold, what seems most urgently needed is to restore to public consciousness and to the consciousness of scholars the idea of power as competence, to develop that idea more fully by differentiating the kinds of energy, ability, and strength which it may imply, and in particular to seek to study powers of the allegedly powerless, the kinds of competence and potentialities for autonomous action which are available to those who do not have the power of dominance. At the end of her article, to underscore her objection to the cult of power, Berenice quoted Hannah Arendt. It is only after one eliminates this disastrous reduction of public affairs to the business of domination that the original data in the realm of human affairs will appear, or rather reappear in their authentic diversity. The meaning of this article for peace researchers, activists, feminist theorists, and activists, and progressive generally has been profound. Berenice Carroll helped illuminate the road to be taken. Overcoming the cult of power was central to her work and her inspiration for all of us who knew her and worked with her. She made it clear that another world is possible.
Hello. Everything I tried to write felt so pale, so inadequate. And much of what I say has been and will be mirrored
and expressed much more eloquently than I can hope to right now. But here we go. My name is River Carner, and I want to thank all of you for being here, and to remind you to take a t-shirt, take a necklace, and please sign the book. This is our remembrance of our notorious BAC, yes. I first met Berenice when she was interviewing to become the director of women's studies at Purdue. I was a grad student representative on the hiring committee that brought her in, and even though a friend of mine was one of the candidates, it was clear that B was the best choice to help build our program. We got that. And of course, so much more. To say that Berenice was tireless is, quite the understatement. Her efforts to create not only her visions for what Purdue Women's Studies could be, but also for what could be possible for women everywhere she went and could not go, seemed to me tireless and limitless. It wasn't always graceful, and it wasn't always kind. But she, so much more often than not, figured out how to get to the yes after she had been told no. Most of you in this room saw and see Berenice as a mentor, an example of how to move through the world in conscience and purpose, a trusted and loyal perspective, an exacting and demanding intellect that could cut through the clutter and expose the heartbeat of a matter so reliably and so necessary. And solidly good for a bit of gossip along the way. All of this is true for me, of course, as well. But also for me, B was my non-biological mother, and I was her non-biological daughter. What crazy terms, right? Well, we didn't share a birth canal adventure. Throughout the decades, our experiences of each other as family were no less real. And I'm sure that some of you feel that way as well. More recently, I hope it doesn't sound too trite to say that it was a privilege to live with and tend to Berenice during the last handful of her years. But it also, and I'm certain you can imagine, was so much else. Again, it wasn't always graceful, and it wasn't always kind. Like all love, it was, at the very least, a blend of glory, desperate anger, suspicion, loyalty, and a dogged commitment to keep trying again because life is short. And to paraphrase Adrienne Rich, there are so few people who are willing to go that hard way with you. Berenice wasn't much for poetry or for metaphor in general. But I found this piece by Billy Collins that gets it pretty close to right, I think. And I also think she'd approve. It's called Litany. You are the bread and the knife. the crystal goblet, and the wine. You are the dew on the morning grass and the burning wheel of the sun. You are the white apron of the baker and the marsh birds suddenly in flight. However, you are not the wind in the orchard, the plums on the counter, or the house of cards. And you are certainly not the pine-scented air. There is no way you are the pine-scented air. It is possible that you are the fish under the bridge, maybe even the pigeon on the general's head. But you are not even close to being the cornflowers at dusk. And a quick look in the mirror will show that you are neither the boots in the corner nor the boat asleep in its boathouse. It might interest you to know, speaking of the plentiful imagery of the world, that I am the sound of rain on the roof. I also happen to be the shooting star, the evening paper blowing down an alley, and the basket of chestnuts on the kitchen table. I am also the moon in the trees and the blind woman's teacup. But don't worry. I am not the bread and the knife. You are still the bread and the knife. You will always be the bread and the knife. Not to mention the crystal goblet, and somehow the wine. Thank you.
I'm Mark Tilton. I also joined the political science department in 1990 with Berenice. I think there were 8 of us that were hired that year. Berenice, my experience of Berenice was she was deeply kind. She helped me personally and professionally in profound ways. I kind of think I might take issue, I don't know, it's just my own impression, is whether Berenice turned her back on Zionism. I thought she had a very high standard for Zionism. That was my sense. So one little element of what I got from Berenice was, and not just from Berenice, but from a wonderful community of friends here, was learning something about Judaism. I'm not Jewish, but I'm raising 3 Jewish daughters. And of course, religious liturgical observance was not a big part of Berenice's life, but I did go to a Seder once at her house. And, so in that sense, got that kind of direct insight into this religious core that I think was, my sense is that Berenice was a very practicing Jew, that she really took the message of Judaism and really went with it. So for me, so now I've spent a lot of time involved in trying to raise Jewish girls, and I think why? It's because of people like Berenice. I think this, I can read books about Judaism, I can go to services and learn some Hebrew and stuff, but, Judaism put in practice is a phenomenal thing. Berenice was amazing. I miss her.
My name is Sheila Rosenthal, and I guess I just want to mention the Lafayette Area Peace Coalition. My name is Sheila Rosenthal, and I just want to mention the Lafayette Area Peace Coalition that some others here are historically part of from back in the the early days of the first Gulf War, and we got to know each other in those meetings, but our relationship became a lot more deeper, and those were just really important efforts to be part of and shape our lives. And just want to remember that.
Hi, everybody. My name is Katie. You probably see me in a lot of these photos with my dynamic duo partner, Annie. We're about 1.5 years apart, but I believe, to my knowledge, I was Berenice's first grandchild. Yeah, I think that's correct. I think I can say she was probably pretty excited to have a woman in the family, woohoo, after 2 sons. And then came my sister, so that was pretty awesome. But there's a lot of things I think I want to say. Sometimes it's hard to put words to them, but there's a lot of things I'm very appreciative of about my grandmother. For instance, I'm really fortunate that I was in the vicinity growing up. There were lots of events that she was able to go to when we were young. I played music since I was like 4 years old, and she came every chance she could to every single one of my performances and my sister's. That was absolutely amazing. I hope it was enjoyable to her as well. Some other things that a lot of people have touched on, Judaism. She was so sharing, so she'd put yarmulkes on my sister and I just because we wanted to wear the hats, even though I'm pretty sure that's not culturally what we were supposed to do. But yeah, she's pretty great. I would say, yeah, a lot of things in the past she's touched me on, and also in the future. It's been really incredible being here with all of you all. I'm a rising senior at the University of Illinois. And hearing all of you share your academic perceptions of my grandmother is absolutely phenomenal. It's really great to get to know her now in that intellectual way. I see you all speaking like all my professors at school, which is really interesting. But I just wish I had spoken with her earlier about a lot of these things. But yes, in the future, I'm studying engineering, much like my father and my mother. But I see a lot that she fought for that I want to continue fighting for. Equality, the gender inequity that still exists in our society today. I see it all the time in my future career field. So anyway, just very proud of my grandmother, and it's amazing to hear from all of you all about what she's accomplished. And thank you for being here. And yeah.
I have the privilege of sharing people's thoughts who can't be here. And I want to do that kind of quickly because I've got 8 of them. Jill Biston-Zinsky, who used to be the head of women's studies at Ohio State, sent us her paper from Pen and Protest that she wrote about Berenice, and it will be part of the book back there. Siobhan Somerville, who was originally a joint appointed faculty member in English and women's studies here, said she was very sorry she wasn't able to come from University of Illinois, but to please give everybody her best wishes. Ruchi Anand, who was a graduate student in political science, writes, Berenice is my role model, feminist and peace activist who taught me how to put theory into practice and live all that one learns in textbooks about women's rights, peace, justice, sisterhood, and how to be a good person. Berenice took me under her wing in the Women's Studies department at Purdue. She was there to teach and to learn, to grow, and to make others grow, to hold hands and prepare us to let go one day. I couldn't have earned my PhD without her generosity and care. Today, your love and lessons, Berenice, still warm my head and heart. I salute you and thank you for being the role model who made me the person I am today. I hope I can be like you to my students to make lives better and people stronger. Rest in peace, Berenice. Janet Afari, who used to be a professor in history and women's studies, writes, "What a great loss for the feminist and progressive community in these dreadful times in U.S. and world politics, when more than ever we need Berenice's leadership, passion, and dedication to human justice, as well as her ability to combine anti-war and anti-fascist activism with dedicated scholarship. It was from Berenice that I learned how one survives in the academic system, watching her build a feminist and progressive program despite great odds. She was a mentor and role model in so many ways, including her relationship with her husband and partner of many years, Clint Fink. The two of them opened their house to lonely graduate students and young faculty and helped create a community of like-minded activists and academics. She will be missed a great deal." Kevin Anderson, Janet Afari's spouse, who was in political science at Purdue and now teaches at UC Santa Barbara. Berenice Carroll was a dedicated, creative, and most original scholar activist who was a real trailblazer for women in academia, someone who never gave up the fight for social and gender justice. She will be sorely missed by the hundreds of other scholars whose lives she affected and by the social movements in which she participated, and that are needed today more than ever. But her spirit will live on if we can even partially fill her shoes. There's a rather long letter from Phoebe Ferris, who taught art at Purdue. And I don't think I'm going to try to read it, but I will leave it for you to take a look in the booklet. She basically talks about how she was inspired by Berenice to teach feminist art criticism and to work with a variety of artists who were interested in Native American art. Jane Splon writes, "Berenice, I remember your broad smile and your warm laugh. I remember the salt and mostly pepper curls that ringed your face. I remember your superior gifts of strategy. I remember the C, the E, in the middle of your name and not being sure how to pronounce it. I remember the feeling of welcome upon entering your home, a home that, without signs or symbols, clearly proclaimed, an advocate for peace lives here. Berenice, I remember you, and I send my blessings for eternal peace." Ann Palo writes, "I met Berenice when I was 22. Newly arrived at Purdue for grad school, I was fiercely a feminist, with all the righteous passion of a young activist. I'd come into that identity through my adolescence, an essential aspect I knew of a commitment to social justice. I'd not had a mentor, though, in how to live that commitment, how to embody that identity, not until I met Berenice. From Berenice, I learned what it is to be abundantly and generously oneself, anchored unwaveringly in conviction and commitment, but with good humor and humility, with sharp thinking and a strong sense of the ironic, with goofiness and courage and vision and determination and kindness. I grew up at Purdue under Berenice's good eye, and her imprint is strong on my life. 2 years. That's how long I was here with Berenice, but for the 25 years since then, Berenice has been a presence in my life, in my living, in who I am. Gratitude, gratitude, gratitude." Diane Gruber writes, "My deep gratitude to Berenice is both general and specific. General in the sense that she was one of the many brave and feisty women who knocked down doors and smoothed the paths for all of the women who came after them, seeking the opportunity to enter academia and study not only the topics of passion for them, but to study them from their own lived experience. My gratitude is also very specific in that Berenice trusted me enough to provide me the opportunity both to teach and organize in the Women's Studies program at a point in my own life when I was pretty inexperienced in both. The space and encouragement she gave me allowed me to cultivate those practices that have remained with me ever since. For me, Berenice will always be a model of what it means to be passionately committed to the idea that as a society, we can do better than we currently are. She's also a model of what it means to be in the struggle for the long haul. We do all we can while we're here, and then we pass the torch in the hope that we'll always be moving just a little closer to that ideal. May all of us carry her work forward. And then there's a very, very long, dense letter, which I will again put into the booklet for those who want to read it. This one is from Anne Sisson-Runyon. So, thank you.
First, I'm going to start this video again.
While he's doing that, I'd like to add one more quote that I think it dawned my grandmother's bumper on her car, and it was that, it's that well-behaved women seldom make history. And I just think that's amazing for the grandchildren that she had, and I'm sorry, Dad, if I've misbehaved too much, but anyway, I think that's a really great quote for all of us to live by too. So.
All right, let's see if I can get through this. Okay, so my mother and I didn't always see eye to eye. She was an idealist and I was more of a realist. We had a lot of spirited and energetic arguments, as Malcolm alluded to earlier. But growing up, that was just the way it was at Grandma's house when family was around. Something that somehow nobody pointed out, she was notorious for being late, which drove me utterly crazy because it was so against my nature. My nature is more the genes of my father. Eventually I learned to build in a mom factor for when we would actually leave for anything as a kid. And the magnitude of the factor was highly dependent on what was involved. So with dinner, it was always a 1 hour factor, 1 hour late. Planes was usually involving a frantic drive to get to the airport just 15 minutes before plane departure. Or by car, often a 36-hour later than planned departure, especially for moving. In all cases, she would always remember that she forgot something, either on the way there or once she got there. Like phone, glasses, important papers, presents, my brother. Whatever it may be. In digging through Mom's things the last few weeks, I came across a lot of photos, which you're seeing, and we'll see some more. But I also found a book of poetry written by her father, my grandfather. And this was a poem from Morris B. Jacobs to Mom when she was probably about a year old. So it says, "To Berenice, little Berenice, do you know just what makes a firefly glow? Just what makes a chipmunk run, sometimes fast and sometimes slow. There is lots and lots of fun learning why, when day is done, crickets do begin to sing, still the next day has begun. Watch with care most everything, or on foot or on the wing. Then your sight will be more clear when things you have not seen appear." So I feel like this little poem was sort of guidance from my grandfather to Mom to be inquisitive and observant. Since Grandpa was a chemist, he probably meant to steer her towards science, but as everyone knows, Mom was a rebel and she wasn't about to follow in her father's footsteps. Yet it captures her nature to explore life, its deeper meanings, and the evolution of societal thought and how to achieve peace and equality. Of my grandparents, I only really knew my grandmother, Margaret, as the others had passed away. But Grandma was fantastic. Mom, unfortunately, did not inherit Grandma's ability to cook. But Mom did inherit Grandma's ability to teach and inspire, though I imagine their styles were somewhat different. Maybe most importantly, Grandma supported Mom in her endeavors and provided a base in New York where Malcolm and I could get dropped off for extended periods of time. I probably have lived about 2 years of my life in New York, spent in 1 to 2 week increments. I was an early Ozark Airlines frequent flyer by the age of 4, and I had my flying wings at age 5, albeit they were plastic. But, while she taught me absolutely zero science, she taught me a lot about being independent. More importantly, she taught me about right and wrong and being free of prejudice and helping people. One of the most surprising moments in my life occurred when I was 18 and very seriously considering joining Navy ROTC right after our glorious leader Reagan had invaded Grenada. My dad, who had been in the Army, went absolutely ballistic in a raving and raging way trying to get me to not join the Navy. Strangely, my mom sat down calmly with me with all the paperwork and tried to weigh the pros and cons. And I was so baffled and confused that I decided not to join the Navy. Her timing wasn't always the best, which makes for, shall we say, memorable experiences. I think one of my favorites was when she decided to throw a kidney stone while in the airport 2 days after our wedding. So a surgery, and a few days later, we were home after spending an overnight in the Charlotte airport. As I said, memorable experiences. Malcolm and I always wanted to do boy things, so we never spent a whole lot of time really doing things with Mom necessarily. When Katie and Annie were born, she wanted to see them and take them places constantly, so I started thinking at times that Mom had wished at least one of us had been a girl. But in reflection, I think it worked out perfectly because we saw up close the struggles and triumphs that she had been fighting for and what was right for women's rights. And this taught Malcolm and I how to raise exceptional, independent-minded daughters, her grandchildren. Okay, so now I'm going to play a video compilation of photos set to the song Rise Up by Audra Day. And my sincere thanks to my wife Lisa and her friend Michaela for putting this together.
You're broken down and tired of living life on the merry-go-round. You can't find a fighter, but I see it in you, so we gon' walk it out. Move mountains, we gon' walk it out and move mountains. And I rise like the day. I rise up, I rise unafraid. I rise up, and I do it 1,000 times again. And I rise up, I like the waves. I rise up, in spite of the ache. I rise up, and I do it 1,000 times again. like dying. But I promise we would take the world to his feet. Mountains, bring it to his feet. Mountains, and I'll rise up. I'll rise like the day. I'll rise up. I'll rise unafraid. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. All we need is hope, and for that we have each other, and for that we have each other. And we will rise, we will rise, we will rise. We'll rise. I'll rise up, rise like the day. I'll rise up in spite of the ache. I will rise 1,000 times again, and we'll rise up. I like the waves. We'll rise up in spite of the ache. We'll rise up, and we'll do it 1,000 times again.
Okay, I'll just say a few more words. So when I was 6 or 7 years old, I started realizing things were a little different with Mom. When my dad came home from work late one day and said, "Your mother won't be coming home tonight." I asked, "Why not?" "She's going to be spending the night in jail for protesting." I asked if she'd be okay. He reassured me that she would be. By the time I was in college, and Joyce mentioned the day he came home from the 1982, and informed me that Mom wasn't coming home tonight. This had become so sort of the norm that I just said, okay. Anyway, she did a great job raising Malcolm and I in her own way, and I love you, Mom. And thanks to everybody who put this together, and thanks for everybody for coming. All right. Well, if we had wine, we could party, but.
Can you say something about how this recording will be available?
We will be in communication, and we'll figure out a way. Yeah. And we'll make photos and stuff available. Just be in communication. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. We have it for another 15, 17 minutes.